Hello and welcome to the In Transit podcast, a place where we discuss all things supply chain. I'm your host, Vishnu Rajamanikam. In this episode, we are joined by Chuck Forst, the Chief Commercial Officer at Reverse Logics, to discuss how businesses can handle product returns in a way that makes it a service differentiator rather than a cost center. For decades, product returns have been viewed strictly as a sunk expense. But that mindset ignores the hidden value returns can unlock. Managed strategically, returns can help forward fulfillment operations, improve demand forecasts, and enable suppliers to adjust their quality control. Chuck and I discuss how to minimize returns, the ways to leverage returns data to inform and improve upstream operations, the need for an executive to own the returns process, and how AI and predictive analytics can be a game changer in this space. If you're a brand exposed to increasing returns volumes, you might want to give this a listen. Hey Chuck, welcome to the In Transit podcast. Really excited to have you here. Could you start with a bit of an introduction about yourself and what you do at Reverse Logics?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Vishnu. Appreciate being an invited guest here on the podcast. So I'm Chief Commercial Officer with Reverse Logics. I've been with the company for about 4.5 years now, overseeing most of our commercial operations. So that would be, marketing, customer success, as well as some of our business development and sales efforts. My background is supply chain software, so working in various marketing leadership roles across different segments of the industry, from warehouse management systems to TMS systems, and even a little bit of time in the ERP space as well.
Brilliant. Let's dig right into the questions. We see companies, especially in the retail space, to obsess over customer experience and forward fulfillment, and they focus on specifically ramping up gross sales numbers. But this perspective rarely applies to their returns department, isn't it? Like, why do you think the returns process is othered and silently swept under the carpet? Like, what are the real business costs of that mindset?
Yeah, it's a great topic. I think what we've seen, over the years, and really since products have increasingly been bought and sold online through e-commerce, that returns have always been, something businesses, whether you're a retail brand or, somebody that maybe is growing their business to business e-commerce presence, you've been dealing with returns, right? And I think part of the issue in terms of it being treated, just as a cost of doing business is for, a long time, especially through kind of the early e-commerce boom, and then you had the pandemic, and even more transaction or sales moved online. Is as long as businesses were able to see growth in sales from an e-commerce perspective, they were less inclined to really dig into kind of the costs associated with that. And one of the biggest, if not the biggest cost, is managing product returns that are coming back through the different channels, right, that a brand is selling through. And I think what we're seeing here in the last, 12 to 24 months is, there's a little bit of an impact from a economic standpoint, right? So, e-commerce sales are not growing as fast as they were. I think we saw some unusual spikes there, but more businesses are starting to pay attention to this area in terms of, product return costs. And I think we'll start to see a little bit more investment in this area, not only from how do we ensure that we're keeping our customers happy, which has always, I think, been the primary focus of businesses looking at product returns. But now it's like, this isn't a core operational area of the business. We can ensure and deliver a great customer experience, but also make it more efficient and cost effective for the business.
Makes sense. I want to understand the true size of the returns problem, Chuck. If we start factoring returns into the definition of gross demand, how much do typical revenue projections actually change? And are companies surprised when they finally see the numbers clearly?
Yeah, I think they are, right? And traditionally, most companies haven't looked at it that way. It's been a measure of kind of gross sales versus net sales. And if you were to really start to essentially subtract the cost of returns, from your overall sales numbers, you'll start to see a more measurable impact in what that is costing the business. And there's, a lot of different statistics out there from, an average return rate for e-commerce being, anywhere from 15 to 20%. That goes higher for fashion categories or apparel categories as well. But the overall cost of return a lot of times is, north of 15%, overall, right? So if you look at that as in terms of an impact to a business, that is significant. And it's, I always categorize a product return as a lost sale, right? You may have, sold that pair of shoes, right? It looked great from an e-commerce standpoint and sales perspective, but when that same pair is returned, or if it's part of a larger order, that's a lost sale, right? So you've not only subtracted the initial sale of that product, but now you have the costs associated with managing and handling that product return as it comes back through your channels. So it's a big impact. I think more companies are starting to look at it from that gross versus net sales perspective and understanding the impact to the business.
Valid points. I've read some of your opinion editorials on LinkedIn, and you've repeatedly argued that returns don't have to be a loss-making function. What are some of the most compelling examples you've seen of companies turning returns into a profit lever, Chuck?
It's a great topic. I think, if you look at a product return a little bit more holistically and see it as an opportunity, another, customer touch point, if you will. There are creative ways to manage the impact, potentially turn it into an opportunity. If you start to look at, the cost of return, can you potentially incentivize a customer who's about to make that return, potentially to keep the product, by offering them a discount? Or are you enabling within your returns experience an opportunity for product exchange, right? And so instead of, hey, we're going to take that product all the way back through our reverse channel, can we at the same time, right, turn that customer's, returns experience into an exchange, right? So whether it's an even exchange or an uneven, right, can you capture some of that lost sales revenue at the moment the customer is interacting with your site and looking at enabling that product return back to you? I think there's other ways that you need to look at digging deeper into the data that you capture around returns and view it as potentially a source of inventory as well. So, a lot of companies that aren't maybe managing returns as effectively as they can might be, overly, I guess, increasing production around products that they don't need to, right? If they've got a lot of, if you look at 10 or 15% of your products are coming back as return, that's 10% that could be reallocated or viewed as potential inventory. So maybe we don't need to produce or order as much of a certain product or style or SKU or something like that, because in looking at our returns data, we know a certain percentage of that product is going to come back. So how quickly can we get it through our returns or our reverse process, right, and actually resell that product? Can you prioritize the processing of certain high moving or fast moving product through your reverse pipeline, right? So you can resell it quicker and avoid, lost sales by having, products that are unavailable or out of stock, right? If you can view that incoming return as inventory and resell it quickly, right, you can minimize the impact to the business.
Absolutely. And I really like your idea of how you look at returns as this extra touch point of customer experience, which kind of flips the script a little bit, especially in an industry where people look at returns as some kind of a reminder of failed sales within the brand. In that thought process, I wanted to discuss the brighter side of returns management as to how businesses can leverage reverse logistics management to tangibly improve the forward supply chain. from forecasting to inventory to product design and even quality control?
Yeah, excellent question. I think again, right, a lot of that is around, how much you're capturing and focusing on returns, right? A lot of the, I would say, rich data that comes back within your reverse supply chain, just as companies, as you noted, right, have really focused on that forward part of the supply chain. That's where there's been traditional heavy investment in systems and processes to, hey, how can we capture every sale, right? Make it as easy and great customer experience on the front end when somebody's buying the product. Take that order, move it quickly through our supply chain and get that product to that customer as quickly as we can, right? There's been substantial investment in technology and processes and, physical space and labor and things like that to enable that experience. And there's a lot of data that's captured. And so a lot of times brands are able to look at that, order flow and make some decisions, but they often neglect looking at, hey, product returns coming back. Are we seeing any trends with why products are coming back, right? Is there certain style, color, sizing, or even, if you look into more of the industrial and manufacturing space, it could be, a faulty component or the product is not easy or intuitive to use and people are sending it back really with no fault, but just because they didn't really know how to use that product. So there's a lot of data that can be leveraged as you look at that, and then start to inform, like you said, the forward part of that, and even all the way back to how a product is produced. If it's something that's more of a high-tech product and you're getting a lot of returns because of a, let's just say a faulty button or, some other, defect with that product, how quickly can you capture that data and get it back to your development team so they can make improvements there? And then on the kind of the forward fulfillment side of it, right, you'll start to see trends around products maybe or styles or, certain, especially as you introduce a new product, if it's not moving as fast as you want or you're starting to notice high return rates, you might want to start to focus your forward fulfillment and even your e-commerce site on different products, or even look at how you can potentially pause or redirect some of those resources. But I think so much of this is you have to start with looking at kind of your, the supply chain, right? And even the whole e-commerce experience is more of a circular process versus something that, is more linear. Product goes out, right? It comes back, and treating those as two separate flows. How can you make it more really circular and say, hey, we know we've got product returns coming in for this SKU. We've got, maybe a bunch of orders that are waiting for that product. How quickly can we kind of update inventory and resell those? So there's a lot of opportunities in looking at this more, I say holistically.
Totally. Addressing returns and understanding why they occur is still a touchy topic within companies, right? But then again, you see returns actually touch almost every function, just like an order going through forward fulfillment, be it with finance, supply chain, customer experience, or even sustainability. From your time at Reverse Logics, what are the biggest cultural or organizational barriers that you see that prevents teams from owning this returns process together?
Yeah, in working with a lot of companies in this area and speaking with a lot of our customers, what we see frequently, it's changing, but it's slowly changing. Is that this, as you mentioned, right, is something that touches a lot of different areas of the business. And a lot of companies are still operating those as kind of siloed areas. So when we, talk with a new prospective customer, we're talking with a very broad team, right? It could be somebody on the, e-commerce team or an e-commerce lead that is really, owning that experience online. They're focused on e-commerce sales, but they also want a rich experience via their e-commerce channel for product returns. And so that's the lens they're looking at it from a customer experience perspective. And then you might have somebody that's more on the warehouse or distribution side who's managing the physical labor as well as the systems and tools within a warehouse around, processing product returns. So their lens is very much different, right? How can they, make sure that, their processor returns as quickly as possible, but doing it accurately, right? So, making sure things are appropriately verified and inspected and graded so you can get things back into inventory. And if it's not grade A inventory, it might go somewhere else. But sometimes, the warehouse or distribution area of the businesses tends to be potentially deploying more and more labor to solve the problem versus looking at potentially from a technology lens. And then, there's kind of the finance team who gets involved, and they're seeing a little bit more of the picture from, sales and return costs. But can they connect it all together? And then there's kind of what I would say is the customer experience team, right? Or customer service that a lot of times ends up being the face or the voice to a customer when maybe, it's not necessarily a happy customer, right? So they might be dealing with customers who are frustrated with a returns experience, or they sent their product return in and they want to know when they're getting a refund or if it's been received. And so a lot of times if companies haven't dedicated resources in this area, right, a customer returns a product and it kind of goes into, this black hole that they don't get updates, don't know what's going on. And so all of these different areas have a different viewpoint and ownership stake in kind of the overall supply chain as well as the reverse part of it. But we see a lot of times as companies are lacking somebody that owns this end to end. And I think we're starting to see a little bit more movement in that space, especially with larger enterprises, hiring or, having somebody that is kind of at an executive level owning product returns and really starting to look at this from an end to end perspective. And I think, the more companies start to do that and put somebody more in charge or a team in charge of this area so it gets the right level of focus, we'll see more and more improvement from not only efficiency, but I think a cost perspective as well.
That's a great point about having someone at an executive level owning the returns process. I see that within mid to large organizations, there exists a lot of processes and informational silos that are invisible to other segments of business units. And it's also a fact that these silos make it easier for departments within that organization to just lie low and not assume responsibility for a return, which in turn makes it a tiresome process to mitigate these return volumes, right? So, how can an executive whose sole responsibility is to take care of returns management, how do they get this sorted? What would that role really look like in practice?
Yeah, great question, right? And I really believe it starts with, viewing a product return similarly to how, companies have treated, what we talked about from a forward fulfillment or the e-commerce sales perspective, right? Where there's been a lot of investment and almost, it's much, I don't want to say it's completely easy, but the investment in people and tools and technology on the forward fulfillment side has been, to me, much easier, right? Organizationally, because, it's a revenue conversation, right? Versus returns, as you noted much earlier, right, has kind of been viewed as a negative area. And, it's harder to justify the investment a lot of times. And, as we've been talking about, it's silo teams and things like that. And so I think if you can get a team or an individual that really owns the reverse flow end to end. And what I mean by that is, they're tied into and connected to, the e-commerce teams and being part of that conversation around, either new product introductions or as, ramping up for sales periods or things like that. So they're informed a little bit from a trend perspective on when, product returns might spike or there might be some unusual activity. But then really from the moment a customer interacts with a business to start a return, all the way through to when that return follows the whole flow, right? All the way through the warehouse to either going back into stock or maybe to some other channel, right? It might be a repair channel. It might be a resale channel or a discount channel based on, something that was potentially wrong with the product, but really owning that end to end and having I would say the power to make decisions and investment areas along that whole continuum, right? Because as we've been talking about, there's a lot of opportunity to impact customer experience. There's the cost side of it, right? And then I think there's also the how can we lessen the impact from a cost perspective, right? How can we move product through that reverse flow and recover costs from it, get it back and sold again to a different customer, right, and recoup some of that revenue. But appointing somebody with enough power, right, giving somebody a seat at the table as similar to somebody that would be on the e-commerce or forward fulfillment side, right? So whether that ends up being a chief returns officer or somebody that's oversight of all reverse operations, I think that's how companies need to start looking at that. Otherwise, it continues being a much tougher conversation and a siloed operation or process within a lot of companies.
Makes sense. What are the different KPIs you would suggest that the returns management executive would have to look at to ensure that they have a measure that helps them understand month over month or quarter gains, and if they're getting better at handling returns?
Yeah, I for a lot of companies, it's almost starting a little bit at some of the more, I would say base level measurements in terms of your return rate, right? So can you, and many companies, surprisingly haven't been able to or haven't really monitored this area to really know what the return rate is, right? I mean, it's one of the early questions we ask a lot of customers. For us is just kind of, do you understand or what your return rate is or what your annual return volume is? And a lot of times they don't have that information readily available, right? So that just, kind of highlights a need to focus on this area more. But if you can start really looking at it, what's your average return rate? How many units are coming back or products are coming back on an annual basis? And then start to break that down based on, the type of product, right? You might be a company that has multiple brands or multiple product lines, or if you're in, fashion and apparel, you have a lot of variability across SKUs. But can you start to then break it down by product and then look at some of the things that might be more seasonality driven, right? Do your returns spike in different areas? And a lot of businesses can answer that piece, but it's very much qualitative, not necessarily, having hard numbers, right? They'll say, oh, we always know our returns spike in January and February coming out of the holiday season and some of the sales spikes, but don't really have the hard data around other points in the year. So I think that's another area is really start to measure it, as to monthly, quarterly, annually, but then also some of the other factors, right, around customer experience. And, what if you have, how do you view a brand new customer's experience with your product, right? Buying online. And then, looking at return rates across your customer categories, right? New customers have much higher frequent return rates, maybe across product lines or just in general. And you might have a lot of rich data around a lot of your returning customers or high value customers that, buy a lot, return a lot, but generally are profitable as well. And then you look at some of the downstream metrics around the operational costs, right? How long does it take you from a moment an RMA or return is initiated to actually process and get that product back into stock, right? Is that days? Is it weeks? Is it months? Look at that and how can you impact that or improve it? And a lot of times it is looking at that from end to end, but then breaking it down again from the moment that product return hits your warehouse. How long does it take, from the day an associate scans that in to actually when it's through your warehouse, right? And that, for us, a lot of people in the warehouse or distribution operation will know, the acronym UPH, which is really units per hour, and something that is very much measured on the forward fulfillment side. How long does it take us to get a new product sale fulfilled and out the door? But on the reverse, it's not always looked at that level of detail. So what is your UPH on product returns and how can you improve that? And I think there's a lot of opportunities process-wise, technology-wise to make that a much quicker process, but also more effective in terms of being accurate, predictable, and then again, you can start making some more informed decisions around inventory and things like that.
Everyone's talking about AI these days, Chuck. So I'm tempted to ask you, is there a way we can look to use AI and predictive analytics to change how businesses manage returns today? Not just operationally, but also in a strategic sense.
Definitely opportunities that we're seeing there. And we've talked a little bit about, kind of the data piece of the equation as it relates to returns. And I think that's, an opportunity from an AI perspective and even just data modeling to kind of analyze product return data or, really take it across the board, right? Make sure you have your e-com or your sales data in there layered with your product return data and start to look for trends, right? Is it certain product categories, certain customer segments, certain regions, anything like that you can start to inform it. And then more on I would say the customer experience side, right? We're seeing a lot of interest in more of our customers deploying and using some of our chatbot functionality, which is really, hey, how do we improve that experience from a returns perspective? Can we start to reduce or prevent returns, right? Encouraging, via a chat feature, right? And encouraging a customer to potentially keep a product or lean them more towards an exchange. Or if it's, somebody that's trying to return, as we talked about, more of a, electronic or high tech product, can you guide them through some initial troubleshooting, right? They might want to return it and, you kind of ask a few surface level questions and you find out, hey, it's, they just didn't know how to operate certain functions of it, right? And you can, eliminate or reduce that product return right there. So that's some of the, really enabling more of a customer experience and service perspective via AI on your website to start to reduce or at least, provide a better customer experience around returns. And then some of the newer things that are being deployed more in the warehouse side is really around, leveraging, image capture to process and move product returns to the warehouse a lot more quickly, right? Can you use, the ability to kind of, take pictures or scan a 360 degree, image of a product that's being returned to look for any defects, to make sure it's not fraudulent, right? Look for counterfeit, and then, really almost enable a no-touch returns process in the warehouse, right? Being able to quickly capture that. And other things are just around very basic things in terms of how you're triaging and moving higher process or higher valued products that are, are being sold much quicker through a warehouse and that returns process to get it resold quicker, and slower moving inventory and products, maybe take a different path. So lots of opportunity there. I think we're seeing companies definitely interested in that. But even, we're kind of looking at it, a lot of times it's a crawl, walk, run approach for many companies in terms of, hey, let's fix the basics or get the building blocks in place and then enhance that with some of the AI technology.
Brilliant. If you look 5 years ahead, what does best-in-class returns management look like to you? And what do you think would separate the leaders 5 years from now from the laggards in the space?
Yeah, wonderful question, kind of the crystal ball, if you will. I think we will see definitely more ownership of this area of the business at an executive level in a lot of companies, right? It will be elevated to a point where somebody owns this area of the business end to end. And what that will do, right, is, companies that think about the returns experience, I think we'll see a lot more enhancement in terms of, hey, if you're somebody that buys frequently from a brand or you're a new customer, there will be a different experience or an enhanced experience a lot of times in the returns process, just because companies are looking at that at a deeper level. They've measured it and they know the impact, right? If I handle this initial, new customer product return this way, we have a much bigger opportunity to keep them as a customer or, upsell them or cross-sell them in the future, things like that. I think you'll see that return cycles from an overall the initial point of return to when that product is back into inventory condense considerably, right? A lot of times when we initially talk with companies today, we're talking weeks a lot of times, and some are even much longer than that, right? But if you can condense that, and that's what I think we'll see in the future, just like you have seen that type of improvement and investment on the forward fulfillment side, right? I can order something online today and it'll be, on my front step within a couple of days, right? How can we optimize the return flow a little bit better? Doesn't have to be a couple of days because, a lot of times product returns, you might not need that back right away, but you might look at it and say, hey, can we lessen the transit costs, right? Look at, pooling points, consolidate returns in one point and then ship them back, in a truckload versus one parcel at a time. So I think just holistically improvements across the board, but I think cycle time around a product return will be condensed. I think the costs of those product returns or impact of the business will be reduced. And I think you'll just see a lot more efficient operations, right? I mean, as I noted earlier, as treating this as a cost of doing business has really resulted in a lot of extra labor and time. And really there hasn't been, the investment that's needed from an overall technology perspective to really reduce the overall, I would say negative impact to the business.
Absolutely. And I think that being a market that is high volume and low margin, it is super important for companies to ensure that they don't have any chinks in their armor. And looking at how most companies handle returns today, there's a lot that can actually help them to get better and retain all their patrons. And with that, we conclude this episode. Thank you so much for sharing those insights, Chuck. It's been an absolute pleasure discussing the nuances of handling returns with you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
This wraps up another episode of the In Transit podcast. To learn more or to hear previous episodes, check out our website at secmr.com/podcast/all or check the podcast segment on thelogisticsreport.com. Thank you for listening and have a wonderful day.